This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Welcome to this special edition of NC Spin. In 9 days, we're going to be asked to vote on the $2 billion Connect NC bond referendum. Recent polling data indicates that many people are not aware of these bonds or what the projects will be funded. So this week, we're going to have 3 panels that will help give you more information about Connect NC. Now, NC Spin panelists John Hood and Chris Fitzsimon will join us for all 3 of these panels. Our first panel includes Chancellor Randy Woodson from NC State University and President Larry Keene of Fayetteville Technical Community College. A little more than half the $2 billion bond package includes money for higher education. $980 million go towards the public universities, $350 million to community colleges. Chancellor Woodson, I want to start with you. The recent Emerging Issues Forum suggested that many of today's jobs won't exist in 20 years. How will the Connect NC bonds help prepare your students and people for these new jobs?
Well, Tom, the governor and the legislature have done a great job of partnering with the university system and the community college system to focus these projects on critical areas like STEM education, science, technology, engineering and math, nursing, medicals, the medical school at UNC Chapel Hill, as well as critical business functions. So I think when you look at what the legislature has done in collaboration with the community college and the UNC system, you see evidence of it focus on the critical economic needs of the state.
Well, and that dovetails, President Keene, into a question for you. One of the primary missions, obviously, of community colleges is job training. If so many of our jobs are going to vanish, it sounds like we're going to need to be doing an awful lot of retraining of current workers over the next few years. How are the Connect NC bonds going to help in that retraining?
That's the hallmark of our existence. It's one of the situations in which we were created to do just that. And the speed with which business changed, the economy changes, society changes, the way we manage and lead people changes. We've got to reflect what the requirements are in the industry sectors that we serve, whether it's in healthcare and manufacturing or other categories.
John and Chris are going to have some questions that I'm sure they're going to want to ask, but I want to ask both of you. One of the comments that I've heard is, doesn't the legislature fund our universities and community colleges? And if so, why do we need these bond proceeds to go ahead?
It's interesting when you stop and take a look at the university system, they're funded predominantly by the state government in terms of their capital expenditures and so forth. Community colleges are predominantly by the counties. And so when you look at the difference in wealth throughout the state, some need it more than others. And so just 2 different funding mechanisms to get the job done. And President Woodson, Chancellor Woodson, not long ago, you made a comment that many of the projects, particularly your school, the School of Engineering and the Plant Life Sciences building, are going to require co-investments from the private sector, and they're dependent on the state passing these bonds.
Absolutely. We've got donors that have stepped up to help us with both of these projects. In fact, we're raising 50% of the resources privately, which shows a critical investment on the part of our alumni and our friends. But at the end of the day, the state owns the university system, and it's critical that the state invest. These kind of investments are hard to do out of an annual budget, and it's critical that when you build infrastructure like this, you do it in a way that borrows the money.
And people need to understand we got 2 separate budgets. Well, the state's got 3 budgets, actually, the continuation budget, the expansion budget. But the capital budget is an entirely different animal from what is your regular funding, right?
It's an entirely different budget. And in fact, it's a budget that to come up with this kind of cash in a short period of time requires the issuing of bonds, the way it does with all of us when we seek to buy our first home. We're all using the banking system to try to manage our affairs, and the state does the same, and it does it very well. In fact, we have the highest bond rating in the country. And so we're making a lot of progress. In fact, one of the ways that we're avoiding a tax increase with this is because the state has managed its affairs so well.
All right.
To that point, gentlemen, one of the cases for many of the projects is that buildings are out of date or that they're in a poor state of repair that require a lot of expense to keep up. Some skeptical taxpayers might hear that and think, well, if we build a lot of new buildings, maybe we'll get to a similar point years in the future where the buildings have not been maintained. How do they get reassured about that use of their money?
Well, it's a twofold issue. Number one, the two buildings that we're building, the departments that are in them are in buildings built in the early 50s. So their buildings are 60 years old. We're trying to teach cutting-edge civil engineering and cutting-edge plant biology and do it in facilities that were designed when technology was very different. So it's both an antiquated facility issue as well as a technology issue.
Is that pretty similar what community colleges are facing?
It is. You look at our place, for example, some of those buildings were built in the late 50s. Technology's changed dramatically in terms of its requirements, and so to ensure that not only do you have the environment that needs to be replicated that you're going to prepare people for, at the same time you need the equipment to make it happen. And so it gives you the space, it gives you the operation. It also gives you an opportunity to refocus and shift in some ways different education and training programs so that you can make room for the ones that have greater demand.
One question I've heard a couple times is that these are new buildings. In some cases, new people will be hired. The community colleges and the university system have constantly, obviously, make budget requests. There's been discretionary cuts to the university system. I know community college President Scott Rawls has wanted some more resources. Will the state be able to fund the operating needs of these buildings when they're built?
We certainly hope so. and in fact, the state's made that commitment historically. But it's incumbent upon us to do everything we can to become more efficient and more effective in the resources that we have to ensure we're putting them to the highest and best use. And I'm sure the same is true in the community college system.
It is true of the community colleges as well. The operational cost associated with these buildings is predominantly carried by the counties in terms of maintaining the capital infrastructures and so forth. When it takes people, the greatest single element in my estimation that we have are the people in our systems that provide the training, the education, and the connection with the business and industry sectors that keep us relevant and keep us on point. And so with that in mind, it will require us to prioritize what we're doing, but at the same time fulfill the needs of the industries we serve.
I want to ask a question that I have heard asked often. What's going to happen with community colleges or the universities if we don't pass these bonds? Where are we going to be, Chancellor?
Well, this is going to send a very difficult signal for us to manage. As I said, all of the universities in our system are raising a significant amount of resources to try to partner with the state to get these done. It tells our donors that, our donors view the public university as a partnership between their resources and the state. So it's going to send a chilling message to those that are investing heavily to try to keep our university strong.
Same with community colleges?
I think with the community colleges, again, are we going to be able to make good on the promises that we've made to the people of North Carolina? We've had an additional 2 million people join us since about 2000, and so when you stop and take a look at the demands that we have on our infrastructure as it's currently provided and trying to address the needs of that group, that's a difficult thing. So as our population grows, as opportunity grows, as prosperity grows, we've got to keep up.
Well, thank you both. And we thank you for watching NC Spin on the air or on YouTube. Here's a reminder, there's much more on our website, ncspin.com, or NC Spin on Facebook. You'll find video footage not seen anywhere else, perspective pieces from our panel, and our weekly column. Get more balanced debate from the Old North State on ncspin.com, NC Spin on Facebook, or on Twitter at NC Spin Tweets. How does it affect local communities? After these messages, we'll answer that.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
I want an attorney general that supports law enforcement, and that's why I back Buck.
North Carolina needs leaders. That's why I back Buck.
I believe in the Second Amendment, and that's why I back Buck.
In the upcoming Republican primary, back Buck. Buck Newton for Attorney General.
Let's prepare our state for the future by supporting the Connect NC bond. The bond will fund smart investments in education, agriculture, state parks, our National Guard, and infrastructure projects, creating job opportunities, strengthening our workforce, and driving innovation. It's a timely investment and a smart one for North Carolina families. On March 15th, stand with Farm Bureau and vote for the Connect NC bond.
The cost of everything has gone up dramatically over the last 75 years. with one exception: keeping electricity affordable. That's the power of your co-op membership. Learn more at togetherwesave.com.
North Carolina's Touchstone Energy Cooperatives, looking out for you.
We now return to NC Spin.
Welcome back to our discussion on the Connect NC bonds. Our second panel is going to discuss how 76 of the 100 counties directly benefit from the Connect NC bonds. And joining us on this panel is Patrick Woodie, president of the North Carolina Rural Center, and Jim Rose, the regional president of Yadkin Bank and a member of the bond committee. Patrick, I want to start with you. One area of this bond package which has received very little publicity is the $309 million in grants and matching funds for local and regional water and sewer systems. Just how important are these funds to these local communities?
Well, water and sewer funds are incredibly important to rural North Carolina right now. We have over 900 publicly owned water and wastewater systems in North Carolina. The vast majority of those, probably close to 90%, are in the rural 80 counties. And they face some real challenges. It's aging infrastructure. Much of it went into the ground 30 to 50 or even more years ago. We face a real challenge in bringing that infrastructure up to standard.
Jim, at the kickoff for the bond campaign, you had what I thought was one of the most delightful speeches that I've heard on the Connect NC bonds, in which you linked every man, woman, and child in this state somehow to these bonds. I wish you'd share that with our viewers.
I'd love to do so. I ask everyone to raise their hand and keep their hand up if anyone in their family had attended a university or a community college, if they'd ever seen the National Guard out after a, I think about the
weather alert or whatever.
A hurricane in eastern North Carolina that we suffered through where the National Guard came and helped. Then I ask, have you drunk out of a water fountain recently, or did you have running water in your home, and have you recently eaten fresh fruits or fresh vegetables or fresh meat because of the agricultural component, or have you visited the zoo or a state park? And so by the end of the talk, and I've done these around the state for the past couple of months, every hand in the room is always up.
So people want to know why we call it Connect NC?
Yes, sir.
It literally does connect everybody in North Carolina. Patrick, I want to get back to this water system situation. We've heard North Carolina has more substandard public water systems than any state in the country, and that the needs are upwards of $30 billion or $20 billion to bring them up to speed and expand them where they are needed. Are these loans and grants really going to make that much difference?
They will make a difference. The last publicly funded bond in this state for water and sewer infrastructure was 1998, so it was over 17 years
Clean
ago.
Water Bond.
In today's dollars, that would be about $1.2 billion worth of spending. So even though this is 309, over the last 17 years, our revolving loan funds that are operated by the Department of Environmental Quality for both water and wastewater infrastructure have grown greatly, and the rate at which they revolved has increased. But
you mentioned before that most of these loans and grants will probably go into rural North Carolina.
Our understanding.
How's it going to be determined who's going to get them?
It will be a competitive process. Department of Environmental Quality will administer the grants and loans, and it will be an application process, so local governments or authorities who own this infrastructure will apply to DEQ. Those applications will be judged against each other, and $309 million worth will be funded.
Jim, our state parks, you mentioned state parks, 17 million visitors per year visit our state parks and zoo in North Carolina. We know we haven't really kept up maintaining and expanding them, but how are these funds going to help them?
Well, there's a high degree of deferred maintenance in all of the parks, and we're going to use these funds to make repairs and renovations at each of the parks that are listed. And one of the great things about this bond, as opposed to when you vote for a candidate, they may or may not consider everything that they promise you during the campaign. They may not live those out once they're in office. The great thing about the Connect NC bond, we tell you every dollar where it's going to be spent, so that when you vote for this, you're assured of knowing where the money's going to go.
And if something happens that we don't, we're going to call Jim Rose.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
There you go.
Gentlemen, if you follow North Carolina politics, whether it's statewide politics or the discussions that are happening in a lot of our communities, two issues often dominate. One of them is public schools, and the other is roads. Now, neither of those needs are going to be addressed by this particular bond package. So for the voters deciding what to do on March 15th, what makes this package a priority?
Well, I think the General Assembly has gone a long way, particularly in the last budget, in addressing some of the long-term funding needs for those other infrastructure items, such as transportation. And there's some other funding mechanisms in place for public schools. But water and sewer infrastructure, the community college system, all of those, we view from the Rural Center workforce development as one of the greatest challenges facing this state, and then the upgrade of our water and sewer infrastructure.
Jim, you're a businessman. We heard a report that came out of the Budget and Tax Center just this past week that this is going to create thousands of new jobs.
Yes, sir. The economic impact is supposed to be something like 1.5 to 2 times the amount of the bond proceeds.
All right. Last question.
Well, I was just going to say, I was going to ask about that because a lot of these projects are in areas that aren't Charlotte or Raleigh or Greensboro, where the economy may not have bounced back as much. So how important is that economic development point?
Very much so. I think roughly 44% of the proceeds will be in the rural counties in North Carolina. So very, very important.
At least that.
All right. After these messages, we're going to have House Speaker Moore, Senator Dan Blue to talk about the bonds.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
I still believe in the Constitution. That's why I back Buck.
I believe in the Second Amendment. That's why I back Buck.
I want someone who puts North Carolina first. That's why I back Buck.
In the upcoming Republican primary, back Buck. Buck Newton for Attorney General.
Connect NC, a bond initiative that makes vital investments in North Carolina without raising taxes.
Connect NC is about investing in our future.
It will create better job training opportunities for the 21st century.
It will make our state safer and better prepared.
It invests in North Carolina's community colleges and our future.
And expand cutting-edge research to strengthen our ag community.
All without raising taxes.
No tax increases.
Please join me in supporting Connect NC.
It's a fact, patients who receive care in the medical home from a trusted family physician reduce healthcare costs through prevention, early detection, and affordable management of high-cost chronic diseases.
Every dollar invested in healthcare matters. Let's invest them wisely, building on North Carolina's medical home model. Better health begins with a medical home, a trusted family physician, the best return on our healthcare investment. Learn about the importance of medical homes at ournchealthcare.com.
Connect NC, a bond initiative that makes vital investments in North Carolina without raising taxes.
Connect NC is about investing in our future.
It will create better job training opportunities for the 21st century.
It will make our state safer and better prepared.
It invests in North Carolina's community colleges and our future.
And expand cutting-edge research to strengthen our ag community.
All without raising taxes.
No tax increases.
Please join me in supporting Connect NC.
We now return to NC Spin.
We continue our discussion of the Connect NC bonds. The General Assembly passed authorization for these bonds in September and scheduled the vote for March 15th. Joining us on this panel will be House Speaker Tim Moore and Senate Minority Leader Dan Blue. Speaker Moore, I want to start with you. $2 billion is a lot of money for the state to borrow. Explain to us how you came up with the right amount for this package.
Well, actually, the House proposal was more than $2 billion, and it was pared back to this as a result of compromise. We came up with these figures really based on the critical needs that the previous speakers have talked about, whether it's the universities, water and sewer grants, agriculture, National Guard. All of these things have been critical needs, and we haven't done a bond package since the 90s, so we felt like we really needed to step up and fund it in a meaningful way.
Dan, Governor McCrory had originally asked for an additional $1.5 billion for transportation. Help us understand why the legislature decided not to include transportation at this time.
The general feel was that in the ongoing continuing budget, because of adjustments in taxes, tax increases, that there would be about $500 million annually for highway transportation. on an ongoing basis, so it didn't make sense.
And there was
to
some
borrow if
understanding
you've already
this
done
isn't going to get us to the $25 billion that we need in transportation, but at least it'll get us started.
It's a start comparable to what happened with
So do we
the,
expect
bonds.
there might be a transportation bond, I don't want to put you on the spot, but might we expect a transportation bond referendum coming up in the next few years?
I don't see the need for one because we made changes to the way money was being transferred out of the Highway Trust Fund, and the way we've kept money from being transferred. You're going to have roughly $400 million more each year going to transportation. The original bond package would have only had $500 million one time. We're actually going to be putting in $400 million each budget cycle here on.
So you feel like that the need will not be there for a transportation bond?
At this point, we do. Yes.
All right, so tell us about the timing for the vote. My memory serves me that typically bond referendums, statewide bond referendums, are held in November. Why March 15th?
The thought was that we wanted to go ahead and get it out there and make sure that folks could really dedicate the information and the time to understanding the bonds. The general elections tend to be more competitive, more divisive, and bond issues tend to get pushed to the back of the burner. We're hoping that this time it may get more attention.
But Dan, this didn't give the committee very long to be able to get this thing up and running and organized and raise the money to message.
Not long at all, but part of the reasoning too was that bonds are as cheap as they've been historically. And the sooner you got it on, 6 or 8 months could make a big difference in the bond rate. So you could pay them off much more cheaply.
All right, here's the big question. You're telling the voters this isn't going to cause a tax increase. Over and over again, I've heard people say, yeah, that's what politicians always say. How can you help assure people that it will not cause a tax increase? Dan, I'll start with you.
Well, based on the projections, it won't, but I will tell you, Tom, even if it did, it would be well worth it because we have to invest in the future, in the infrastructure. If we expect to attract the brightest to North Carolina and retain the brightest in North Carolina, especially through the university.
And because of various economic cycles, we haven't been able to put a bond, as you said, Speaker Moore, we hadn't put a bond issue on the ballot in a long, long time. What do you say to folks that say they don't believe that we're going to not have a tax increase?
We've run the projections. These bonds will not result in any tax increases. In fact, if you look 3 to 4 years out from now, even with these bonds, North Carolina will owe less than it owes today.
All right, John or Chris?
Well, if I may be a little bit Johnny One note, let me push back a little bit on the no new taxes thing, because I think lots of people do have skepticism, as Tom said, about it. And one of the scenarios they imagine is, what if, and no one wants this to happen, but what if in the next year or two there's a recession and you have revenues come in way below projections and you have expenses for Medicaid and other things come in above projections? The bonds have to be, that's debt service, that's going to be paid first. They wonder in that scenario if there wouldn't either have to be budget cuts or tax increases to accommodate these bonds. What do you think? How would you avoid at least having a tax increase occur during a recession?
We don't see the need for a tax increase. In fact, if you look at the General Assembly in the last few years, we've actually cut tax cuts through this year's budget, and what we're seeing is that lower taxes are spurring greater economic activity and more revenue.
Gentlemen, there's some people that are just worried about adding more debt to the state. We've traditionally been considered a relatively low debt state. How are these bonds going to affect our state debt?
It won't affect the rankings or the credit ratings at all. But what it will do, again, Tom, the important thing is that it will start addressing pent-up needs that haven't been met in more than a decade. And typically when you're coming out of a recession, as we were in, you start doing the things that you've fallen behind on. And I think that this gives us an opportunity to do a little. But the overall debt for the state is not overwhelming. The treasurer has said that it does not put an extra burden on the state.
But as the speaker said, it's been how many years since we had a state bond referendum? It's been a long, long time.
15 years.
The $3 billion university bonds, I guess, were the last times we asked the voters to go for a debt.
I've actually heard a couple of people, and I think we alluded to this in earlier segments, wondering why the state can't pay for some of these as we go. And we mentioned the local water and sewer grants. There was a problem, the Clean Water Management Trust Fund that used to, I think, be funded at $100 million a year that did help a lot of local governments with their water and sewer needs. Why is the bond borrowing money or setting up a revolving fund a better idea than going back to the way we used to fund it with the Clean Water Management Trust Fund?
Frankly, I think a combination of the two models is a way to do it, Chris. In this year's budget, we also had funding for water and sewer grants as well. But this is a major way to really kick it into high gear and really get some serious money out there for critical infrastructure needs.
Why should we pass these bonds? We're going to ask the Speaker and the Senator after these messages.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
Your family physician knows your health is more than just having a personal relationship with your doctor. You must have access to clean water. You need a place to exercise like our wonderful state parks. And we must ensure the healthcare and research workforce of the future. The North Carolina Academy of Family Physicians believes that when it comes to good health, we are all in this together. That's why we support the Connect NC bonds. Vote yes to invest on March 15th and vote for the Connect NC bond.
Let's prepare our state for the future by supporting the Connect NC bond. The bond will fund smart investments in education, agriculture, state parks, our National Guard, and infrastructure projects, creating job opportunities, strengthening our workforce, and driving innovation. It's a timely investment and a smart one for North Carolina families. On March 15th, stand with Farm Bureau and vote for the Connect NC bond.
We now return to NC Spin.
Senator Dan Blue and House Speaker Tim Moore continue to talk about the impact of Connect NC bonds. Speaker Moore, there are growing undercurrents of people, including some of your own legislators, who are opposing passage of these bonds. What do you say to them to convince them that we ought to vote for them?
We worked really hard to come up with a comprehensive bond package that addressed really critical needs. We wanted to make sure we were borrowing money for long-term capital projects. And I think if you look toward the fact this is a growing state, that we want to be on the cutting edge of technology and job creation, we need to do this. It's just like if you do a major renovation of your home, sometimes you can't always pay as you go and you have to borrow something every now and then.
I asked the first panel, but Dan, what happens if we don't pass these bonds?
Well, our university system overall will pay dearly for it. It will not be able to achieve what it's capable of achieving. I think it'll lose some of its status. And as importantly, I think that we will lose the ability to bring some of the brightest people to North Carolina, to keep some of the brightest people in North Carolina.
What message are we sending to businesses that might want to locate here, or new residents might want to locate
if
here?
If it fails, it means that we don't want to invest in the future.
I think the bond will pass. I certainly hope it does. It had overwhelming support in a bipartisan manner in the General Assembly, and I think it shows to businesses that we are serious about education and economic development in the state.
So, closing words that you would make to the voters of North Carolina about this, because obviously both of you think it's pretty important.
Well, I'd simply say that it is critical to the future of the state. We talked about higher education, but we got the potential for Flint right here in North Carolina.
Speaker?
That's why we need to invest.
We have to have these critical needs met. Some of these needs have been pent up for many years, and the bonds is the most effective way to do so.
I thank you, and I thank all of our other panelists for being with us this week. We hope this special edition of NC Spin has helped answer most of your questions on the Connect NC bond referendum. To stay informed all during the week, give your feedback, and read my weekly column, be sure to visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch NC Spin on Facebook. Next week, we're going to devote the entire program to a comprehensive soup-to-nuts discussion on races and the candidates in the March 15th primaries, so you'll want to watch that. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.